Welcome back to Gript, everybody. Today we're here to discuss the future of Europe. We're joined by Paddy Manning, a commentator whom you may have seen online and on TV. And we're also going to discuss the arrival of President Trump to the country. So Paddy, how are you feeling first of all about President Trump's arrival?
I'm feeling enormously welcoming.
Good.
I think it's great to see him here. Mr. Trump has had his problems, but he has proven to be an amazing president. The very fact that he brings most liberals, including our president, out in hives makes me want to welcome him more.
Well, that's good enough for me too, I have to say. And what do you think of the media's reaction so far to his visit?
It hasn't been as bad as I expected. I expected it to be uniformly hostile, dismissive, the usual things we do. Oh, how stupid Trump is. You know? Yeah, he's so stupid he managed to beat the entire Republican, Democratic, and Clinton establishment to become president of the United States. But they don't acknowledge this at all. But this time round, they haven't just been quite as dismissive.
And do you think, does he consider Ireland important?
No. Unlike most other American presidents, I think for Trump, the Irish-American vote hasn't been a big thing. And that's unfortunate for us, because there's things we want. We still have undocumented Irish in America that we want help with. And, you know, the reaction to Trump of treating him like some sort of pariah isn't helping that. The Irish-American vote tends to be, at best, soft left, democratic. It didn't feature for Trump.
What frustrates me most sometimes is seeing how the media will depict Democratic presidents like Obama and vice presidents maybe like Hillary Clinton as fantastic people who are champions of human rights.
Yes.
Overlooking the fact
Anything
that, for example,
they do.
Obama did more drone strikes than any president before
The
him.
Republicans nicknamed him President Drone Strike.
Exactly, and will overlook any amount of wrongs, including with Bill Clinton and the controversy around him, in order to celebrate these democratic leaders.
For the Irish media and for Irish politicians in general, and the two have now become almost interchangeable, the Democratic Party is the legitimate party of government in the United States. I'll give you an interesting one. Most of the major political parties send out delegations to the national conventions in the selection year. They send them to the Democratic National Convention. I was appalled when I was a member of Fine Gael to discover that they didn't send somebody to the Republican convention. Mm-hmm. They sent them to the Democrat convention. It's as if we've taken sides here. And of course, we've taken the wrong side. Most Irish people, because of the media bias, think that they would vote Democrat. They wouldn't. They would, at this point, vote Republican. If you look at where the Democratic Party is right now, it's somewhere to the left of Joe Stalin. Look at their slate of candidates. They're appalling. Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren, who got a job pretending to be a Cherokee Indian until the Cherokees objected. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But all of them, they have a couple of things in common. One is the Green New Deal, which is horrendous economics, abortion up to the date of birth, universal health care, even though it's been proven that America does better without it. They have an extraordinary set of things they're going in front of the voters with.
It seems as if the approach of journalists throughout much of the West is simply to become activists and celebrate as a cause those who are on their side.
You're absolutely right. This goes back to what Gary Kavanagh calls the flaw in journalism schools, that every journalism school is now a liberal madrasa, a faith school for liberals. You're far too young to remember Ronald Reagan's visit here. And Reagan got exactly the same treatment that Trump is getting. He got exactly the same denunciations. We had terribly bright left-wingers telling us how stupid Ronald Reagan was. If you think, by the way, that Ronald Reagan is stupid, what you need to look at, or was stupid, what you need to look at is his 1964 Goldwater speech, which is up online. Just Google Reagan Goldwater and you'll find it. It is impossible to think that any politician in any major country could deliver a speech now so comprehensive, so packed with facts, and so powerful.
Mm-hmm. I find it such a pity that the approach isn't simply to criticise the bad policies and affirm the good policies, regardless of which party a president comes from.
That's because you have different ideas of what constitutes bad policies. For most journalists, a president being Republican automatically means all these policies are bad.
And we haven't seen many journalists, I don't know of any, who have celebrated the fact there hasn't actually been a war launched during this presidential term.
Not alone has there not been a war launched, but Trump is actively seeking to withdraw American forces from all of the wars launched by his predecessors, including Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm. One of the only criticisms I've had during this presidential term has been the fact, though, that Obama continued that habit of Americans of selling billions of dollars of arms to the Saudis.
Yes.
Weapons used to kill innocent Yemeni.
I think that the world can stand ashamed. It's not just America. Britain, France, West Germany, showing my age, have all sold weapons to Saudi Arabia, which is engaged in a horrendous war in Yemen. And of course, we will find in another couple of years that they also sold them to the rival forces backed by Iran. And the fact is that this is a war in which people are starving to death. The photographs from Yemen that are coming out are so awful. And yet, it's as if this is not happening. Or is it that this doesn't matter because it's happening to brown people? Is it only when white people suffer? And I think that fundamentally, there has to be racism at the heart of the ignoring of the suffering and tragedy of Yemen.
So in terms of Trump's visit to Europe, he's coming at a time where we are seeing a shift in terms of the popular appetite for the
everywhere
future of the
except here.
continent. Everywhere except Ireland, it seems.
Uniquely, the only place in Europe where a pro-European party did well was here. Fine Gael, which is Europhiliac to the point of a perversion, solely because the only place for 30 years that Fine Gael could win an election in was the European Parliament. They couldn't win a domestic election, so they became Europhiliac. They win. They get 2 seats in the most conservative European constituency in Ireland. They get a pro-abortion, vacuous Tamagotchi princess elected simply because people didn't vote.
And so what does that say about Ireland?
We don't take the European Parliament seriously. We don't regard it as having any matter, and we just vote for whoever we know on the ballot paper. The South ballot paper was almost a joke. It was almost 2 feet long, of candidates I'd never heard of, and I'm engaged, I'm involved in the bubble. I know, there were several on the ballot paper that I knew personally, but there was a vast mass of candidates I'd never even heard of. So my guess is that any citizen voting was going to find a problem with it.
So politics has largely been reduced, it seems, to a
in the European parliamentary elections
to
in
a popularity
Ireland,
contest.
it's not even a popularity contest, it's a name recognition contest. Who do you know? Which name leaps out at you?
Were you surprised at the likes of Peter Casey not getting elected?
No, not at all. Casey ran a dreadful campaign.
But the media were also silent about him really largely.
I
Maybe
don't
they
think
learned their lesson after
I
the
think
election.
I think the media are now doing a thing where it's this thing: don't give the oxygen of publicity, and they patrol themselves. What does Twitter do in Ireland? The only purpose that Twitter serves in Ireland is to allow journalists to police each other, so that they don't express the wrong opinions and they don't give the wrong people publicity. That said, Casey had enough avenues to get publicity, but the publicity he got was all bad. For instance, carbon tax. He started off backing even more severe environmental measures. Now, that might have sold in Dublin. I don't think it was a seller in Donegal and Mayo and Galway. I might be wrong. There was a green surge in some areas. Casey never seemed to develop a cohesive viewpoint, and that to me is his big flaw for voters. You don't know what he's for.
So what does the future of Europe look like, given the current makeup?
That's going to be fun, isn't it? What does the future of Europe look like when you have anti-centralist, anti-federalist parties winning right across Middle Europe? Law and Justice in Poland got its highest ever vote, as an anti-EU party this time. Orban, who's in continuous war with the mandarins of the EU, got 52% of the votes for Fidesz. On the other hand, the 5 presidents report that we were talking about earlier, which envisages a total integration, monetary and fiscal, that all budgets will be approved in Europe, not by the national parliaments first, but by Europe. That's still ongoing. That's still the determination of people like Juncker and Verhofstadt, and Juncker was one of those involved in it. There's going to be conflict. There's quite clearly going to be conflict. The question is, how is that conflict going to arise and be settled? The big issue for Europe right now would appear to be Brexit. But in a sense, Brexit is sorted. Britain will leave. That's no longer in doubt. That wasn't really ever in doubt after the vote. The question is, will Salvini launch his alternative currency to the euro, effectively taking Italy out of the euro?
So the focus really is turning to Italy, where his
should.
party just had a meteoric rise in
Again, extraordinary performance from a party that used to be La Lega de Lombardy, now taking seats in Puglia and in the toe and the heel of Italy. This is no longer La Lega de Lombardy, it's La Lega d'Italia in effect now. And Salvini is massively opposed to the EU, and he's got no reason not to be. Salvini would be Prime Minister of Italy had it not been for the EU. Monti is Prime Minister of Italy because he was installed by the EU.
So when the EU was originally being formed, I think it was the European Coal and Steel Community, was it the intention of the founders to create a fully federalised Europe as we seem to be approaching?
Yes.
It was.
And this shocks people. I think this probably shocks Catholics like you who talk about subsidiarity. But you have to remember, the Europe that they were looking at and the European project they were looking at existed in a far different time. Government didn't integrate itself in our lives to the same extent in 1955 as it does in 2019. When Adenauer and Monnet and those men were looking at an integrated Europe, they saw the level of government not rising. In fact, they probably saw it fall a little because national governments wouldn't need to be in such control of citizens. This is not what has happened. Government is more and more involved in our lives. Government spends more of our money. Government makes more regulations.
We're micromanaged from
We are
Brussels.
micromanaged. And again, it's like small things make a big difference. Because the European Parliament has no major power other than to dismiss the Commission, it involves itself in trying to find small areas of our life to regulate, ostensibly for our own good. But of course it never is. The famous example, and it's years old, is having spent months and months debating the regulations on jam and having had submissions from all over Europe on it. When they published the regulations on jam and described the need for a certain percentage of fruit, they discovered that the Portuguese use carrot jam. So for the purposes of EU regulations, carrots were redefined as a fruit. It's that level. Why do we need EU regulations on jam? Let us eat what jam we want. Let the customer decide. But of course, that's not what the European Parliament and the Commission want to do.
Well, issues like that often are to benefit the large corporations,
Yes, they are.
And to squeeze out
Yes, they
the
are.
lower men
Yes,
on the road.
because regulation always helps the larger corporations. Perfect example is in this country, calorie counts. If you're a chain of restaurants, having calorie counts on fixed meals is really easy. You know, you can publish because you know exactly what's being served. If you're a single restaurant whose chef goes down to the farmer's market on Thursday to buy produce, and goes, oh, there's what we could do. We could have an asparagus souffle today. There's lovely asparagus. Well, no, you can't, because you haven't done the calorie count. So the once-off single restaurant doing local produce is hurt, whereas the chain restaurant doing industrialised food is benefited.
So in controlling almost every acre of land within
Yes.
the EU, is it fair to say that these unelected elites in the European Commission have achieved more than the totalitarian dictators of the 20th century tried to achieve?
Extraordinary things. Can you imagine, if you were to say to anybody that there was a time when food was scarce and farmers were forced to leave land idle, when farmers were forced not to have any more cows, and yet for 30 years the EU operated a quota system where farmers weren't allowed to produce any more milk than they produced in 1983. That's extraordinary nonsense. And it was harmful to consumers. But the power of regulation, the power of money, they don't use force, they use money.
And they've achieved total control, and
They
we've
have, yes.
sleptwalked into it.
We've sleepwalked into it, yes. Ireland sleepwalked into so much here. You're a Donegal man. You know the price.
I'm proud of it, Paddy.
Well, sure, everyone has to be proud of something, Tim. And you should be proud of being from Donegal. It's a wonderful county. But Donegal people know the price that has been paid in fisheries. You know, Killybegs has paid an enormous price and continues to pay an enormous price because we handed our fisheries away for farm grants in the 70s. Mark Tinton went to Europe and got the grants and got access to EU. We got the access to EU markets, but we handed the most valuable fisheries in the world away.
We handed 200 billion over the past 40 years away.
200 billion over
which
the
is
last 40.
about the size of our national debt.
Yes, exactly.
A remarkable
and the thing it did was it impoverished counties like Galway, Mayo, Wexford, who continue to be impoverished. And what do they get in return? They get EU regional grants as a sop when they could have had a fishing industry.
And Ireland, I think, like a lot of other European countries, its rural areas are emptying out and we're being made into city-states, essentially.
Well, you see, it's difficult. The rise of urban centres starts probably 5000 BC, and it has continued. The difference now is that instead of the urban areas simply existing and a rural population continuing, we are emptying, as you said, rural France, rural Ireland. We don't seem to know what to do there anymore. We seem to have lost the idea of what these places are for. We no longer, the people who live there can no longer be engaged in food production because food production is so mechanized, we can do it with so few people, and that's great. But we haven't found any alternative inside the country. And of course, our planners won't allow people live in the countryside. We're not allowed to have villages. We're not allowed to have any of those things. If you try and build a housing estate in a village, the level of regulation you will face, you will simply not be let do it. Small industries aren't allowed moved to rural towns.
It's incredible.
It's an incredible situation.
So in terms of the wider picture of Europe, we seem to have this block of nations producing Eurosceptic parties like the Brexit Party, Law and Justice.
Now, there's the one that we should have mentioned, the Brexit Party. The extraordinary rise of Farage's new party that leads the largest single nation bloc into the European Parliament. He's got 29 seats. He's got more seats than Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats.
So with this bloc, are we seeing the beginning of the end of the EU, perhaps, in its current form?
In its current form, we should be, but there's going to be a war. The centre is not going to let go easily.
The centre cannot hold.
The centre cannot hold, yes.
Who's that?
Yates, wonderful. Is loose, the blood-dimmed tide.
That's it.
Yes, he was. It's a set of lines that keep coming back at the moment.
Written about the Russian Revolution.
It's written partly about the Russian Revolution, but also what he saw was the coming war, because at this point the war everywhere was breaking out, but it's his despair at the world he was living in, and it works.
And so, do you see this ending peacefully, or do you think it's going to?
I have jokingly maintained that the last country to get out of the EU peacefully will be Britain, and after that, others will have to fight their way out. Juncker doesn't have divisions, and he doesn't have an army. The question will be, what will become? Will the EU have to break down completely, or is there an alternative?
Because everyone's in favour of a trading bloc, aren't they? No one has a problem.
No one seems to have a problem with the trading bloc. The interesting one there will be the currency union. Currency unions have very bad histories. Very few survive. And they certainly don't survive in the format that the European one does, the euro, simply because we're not a common currency area in any real sense. For most people, for most French people, immigration to Britain or Ireland is not really an issue. They wouldn't consider it. Language would get in the way. Now, you get some immigration, but nothing like the sort of thing that you would get in America. You know, say between California and Texas and other states. There's also the fact that different national governments are setting different tax levels, have different national debts, so that affects the currency. Mm-hmm. Now, they don't have the right to print the currency. That's where Salvini's effort will be interesting.
And he wants to get at Mario Draghi in the ECB.
He does, yeah. And in fairness, somebody kicking the ECB should be welcomed in Ireland. The ECB certainly wasn't our friend and mostly was our enemy in its period of existence. Go back to the weekend of the 27th of September 2008, when the queues in Kilkenny to take the money out of the Bank of Ireland and put it into the post office met each other. And every single bank in Ireland was bankrupt. That happened on the ECB's watch.
And so will it simply take another handful of countries to leave the EU for leaders to reassess, or for them to pull back?
I think the rise of the populist parties, anti-EU parties, will have to force a reassessment long before anyone leaves.
Well, Paddy Manning, it's been very interesting. We appreciate your time, and it's always enjoyable, and we hope to have you in again. And for those watching, thank you very much for being here, and please tune in again.